Welcome to the Psychology Undergrad.
Today we're doing something a little different. We're skipping the study hall, forgetting the late-night cram session.
And we are jumping straight into sort of the foundational material of social psychology.
That's right. Today's mission is the ultimate synthesis. We've basically carved out the most important and, let's be honest, sometimes the most confusing concepts from a bunch of core chapters.
Yeah, we're pulling from the self, social influence, group dynamics.
And behavior. All to create, hopefully, a unified understanding of how you function within the social world.
Think of this deep dive as your cheat sheet, but one where we actually slow down and try to make the ideas really stick, so you're not just, memorizing terms for an exam.
Right, you're understanding the mechanics of human interaction. We're going to unpack some really big puzzles today.
Like the intense, almost draining effort we put into self-presentation. That constant effort to look good to other people.
Oh, totally. And we'll tackle why willpower just feels so fleeting. We're going to introduce the critical concept of ego depletion.
Okay, so if you've ever wondered why saying no to that second scoop of ice cream is way easier in the morning than at like 10 p.m.,
that is ego depletion at work, right there.
then we'll zoom out a bit. We're going to look at the powerful and often invisible pressure of conformity.
And how that affects group decisions. And then we'll finish up by dissecting the really complex motivations behind why we choose to help or to hurt.
And finally, what the science actually says about that lifelong pursuit of, well, genuine happiness.
So we'll start with the self, that inner engine of identity. Then we move to the social environment, analyze behavior, and wrap it all up with well-being.
Okay, let's get into it. This whole journey into the self in society, beginning with the biggest question of all, who exactly are we?
Right.
So when we first start thinking about the concept of the self, it seems so intuitive, so simple.
Yeah, you just assume you have one. Singular me.
Exactly. But social psychology immediately throws a wrench into that by showing us that our sense of self is, well, it's constantly shifting based on our environment.
Absolutely. The sources define this really fundamental split. On one hand, you've got your personal identity.
Okay, so that's what makes you unique. Your individual skills, your weird hobbies, your specific memories.
Yeah, it's like your psychological fingerprint. But on the other hand, there's your social identity.
And that's where we define ourselves based on being members of specific groups.
I'm a student, I'm a member of this club, I live in this city. All of those are social identities.
And the really interesting part, I think, is that we're always sliding along what they call the personal versus social identity continuum.
Right, you don't just pick one and stay there.
No, for instance, if you're sitting at home working on some, I don't know, unique, solitary project, your personal identity is probably front and center. You're focused on your talents.
But then imagine you go to a massive alumni event or a political rally.
Suddenly, your social identity as a member of that group just surges forward.
And your unique personal preferences, they become less relevant than the collective goals and norms of that group.
So the fluidity of this continuum is key, because whichever identity is focal at the moment dictates how you behave.
And, crucially, who you compare yourself to.
Right, comparison. How does the context of that identity change how we evaluate ourselves? We're just wired to compare, but the target matters so much.
It fundamentally changes the emotional and psychological outcome. So if we engage in what's called intra-group comparison.
So within the group.
Exactly. You're measuring yourself against others within the same social group. So if you're comparing your GPA to your lab partners, that comparison defines your status inside the team.
And that can lead to what, like constructive competition or just intense envy?
Both, yeah. But intergroup comparison is something else entirely. That's when you contrast your entire group with another group. You're not comparing yourself to your lab partner anymore.
You're contrasting the whole science department with the arts department.
Exactly. And this kind of comparison, it boosts group solidarity. It helps define what makes your group distinct. And it often leads to that phenomenon of seeing your own group, the in-group, as superior.
Of course. And finally, identity isn't just about who we are right now.
Right. It's about who we're aiming to be. We spend a lot of time thinking about our possible selves.
These images of how we might be in the future. And the book split them into desired potentials.
The successful careerist, the healthy, virtuous adult.
And the dreaded potentials.
Yeah.
The version of yourself you're actively trying to avoid.
The failure, the lonely person, the person who's just perpetually stressed out.
I feel like the dreaded self is often a way better motivator than the desired self.
Oh, for sure. The fear of failure can be a massive engine for productivity.
That internal drive to avoid the dreaded self.
Yeah.
It naturally leads us to how we present ourselves on the outside.
Which brings us to self-presentation, or as it's sometimes called, impression management.
Right. This is the conscious and unconscious effort we make to shape how other people see us.
Ideally, to produce a favorable first impression. It's a huge social task.
It's exhausting. We spend so much cognitive energy just picking our clothes, curating our social media, monitoring our tone of voice.
And the sources detail some really calculated tactics. The first one is pretty straightforward. Ingratiation tactics.
Ingratiation.
Yeah.
So that's just conveying positive regard, often through strategic flattery or praise. Right?
Yeah, it's trying to get someone to like you so they'll comply with your requests later or just think highly of you.
The classic brown-nosing maneuver.
Yeah.
You're building social capital.
Exactly. But the second tactic is actually really counterintuitive, self-deprecating.
Okay, wait. Why would intentionally implying that we're inferior to someone else be a good impression management strategy? That seems backward.
It's brilliant, though, when you think about it strategically. By minimizing your own skills or achievements, you do a few things.
Okay.
First, you signal humility, which is a desirable trait. Second, you invite the other person to reassure you, which kind of validates your connection.
And third, and this is the big one, you lower their expectations.
Precisely. If you end up performing well after putting yourself down, the contrast makes your success seem even greater.
It's calculated vulnerability and expectation management.
Wow. So if managing how people see us on the outside is that complex, figuring out our internal reality-achieving self-knowledge is even harder.
This is the process of determining who we really are, our core values, why we do what we do.
And the intuitive way we try to do this is through introspection.
Right, just privately thinking about all the internal factors that shaped our personality and behavior. We journal, we meditate, we reflect.
But social psychology is really, really skeptical about how effective this actually is.
How so?
Well, we're often excellent at knowing what we feel, but we're abysmal at knowing why we feel it. Our internal explanations are often just post hoc rationalizations. They're not the actual causes.
We're just making up a story that fits after the fact.
Exactly. And this difficulty spills over into how we think about the future through something called effective forecasting.
Okay, effective forecasting. This is our systematic failure to accurately predict how we would feel about events we haven't actually experienced.
Yeah, we drastically overestimate the intensity and the duration of our future emotional reactions.
Like thinking a breakup will ruin your life for a year, or that getting a huge raise will make you happy forever.
I remember that feeling of getting my college acceptance letter. I thought it was going to be permanent ecstasy.
And what happened?
Within a week, it was just the new normal. The emotional adjustment happens so much faster than we predict.
And that failure to know ourselves can actually make other people better predictors of our behavior than we are.
This is the observation of self-other accuracy. It turns out that a close friend or even a casual acquaintance who just observes your behavior patterns objectively,
They might be just as accurate or even more accurate than you are at predicting how you'll act in a specific situation.
yeah.
Wait, hold on. So you're telling me that my roommate, who sees me study for 10 minutes and then spend 2 hours on YouTube, is better at predicting my exam performance than I am?
It's possible
But how? Why are we so blind to our own patterns?
because we are burdened by our own complexity. We know all our shifting internal states, our intentions, our past attempts to change. We're in our own heads.
So we're biased by what we want to do.
Right. Other people, they just see the simple, clean data, what you actually do.
Yeah.
They aren't bogged down by our complicated, self-serving narratives.
That's a compelling argument for trusting objective observation over our own introspective guarantees.
For sure. And that sets us up perfectly to talk about resources.
Because if self-knowledge is hard, then self-control is the daily grinding effort needed to align our behavior with our goals.
It's refraining from enjoyable but distracting actions in order to do things that help achieve key goals.
And this is where the resources just run dry. The concept of ego depletion is, well, it's arguably one of the most practical and frustrating findings in this whole field.
It suggests that self-control is a limited resource. It's like a mental muscle that gets tired.
So every act of regulation, whether it's resisting road rage, being polite to a difficult customer, or forcing yourself to study. It draws from a single pool of energy.
Yep. So the diminished capacity to exert subsequent self-control after you've already done so means that the more you resist temptation early in the day,
The weaker you are to resist completely different temptations later. This is why after a massive test, I always cave and eat something super unhealthy. It feels like my willpower battery just dies.
it does die, metaphorically speaking. The mental resource required for focused effort, emotional regulation, and resistance is depleted.
This is a really profound point, especially when we start to consider the moral dimension of it.
How do you mean?
Well, if we link self-control to, virtue, ego depletion gives us a clear psychological mechanism for moral failure.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, if you look at moral or faith traditions, they often talk about maintaining virtue or resisting temptation. Ego depletion explains why it's so much easier to sin or just slip up when you're mentally exhausted.
Right. You've used up your limited capacity on all these mundane tasks, being polite, meeting deadlines, the stress of commuting.
And now, when a truly taxing moral choice comes up, the reserve tank is just empty.
It really shifts the focus from just like moral character alone to resource management.
Exactly. To maintain virtue or reach your goals, you have to protect your self-control capacity.
So it suggests that scheduling important moral or self-improvement tasks like meditation or intense studying or a difficult conversation for times when your resource is full.
It's not just strategic, it's essential for success.
Wow. Okay, so moving from that internal regulation to external evaluation, we define ourselves massively through social comparison.
Just evaluating ourselves by measuring up against other people.
And this process is so tricky because the person you compare yourself to dictates the emotion. So downward social comparison.
That's looking at someone who's inferior or who's doing less well than you.
Right. And we do this primarily for self-enhancement. It boosts our current self-esteem. It makes us feel better about where we are.
But the more complex one is upward social comparison.
Comparing yourself to someone who's superior or doing better, this one's a mixed bag.
How so?
Well, if the successful person is distant or, unattainable, it can be motivating. If they can do it, maybe I can reach higher.
But if the person is close to us?
It can be devastating. It leads to envy, feelings of inadequacy, a drop in self-esteem.
This emotional tension is what the self-evaluation maintenance model tries to formalize.
Right. It states that we actively work to maintain a positive self-view by manipulating our distance from successful others.
But only on dimensions that we really value.
Exactly. So if my friend wins a massive award in a field I don't care about, like, say, competitive dog grooming,
I can bask in their reflected glory. I celebrate their success because it doesn't threaten my ego at all.
But if they win the award in the field I value most, say, script writing, I suddenly start distancing myself from them.
You might focus on their flaws or start hanging out with other less successful writers to protect your self-image.
It's a purely defensive, strategic realignment of your social circle. It shows that self-esteem is fundamentally relational, and we are willing to sacrifice connection to protect our sense of competence in the areas that matter most.
Okay, speaking of self-protection, our brains are just full of these incredible mechanisms designed to keep us feeling competent, even when we fail.
And the most powerful of these are the self-serving biases.
This is the tendency, and it's so powerful it's considered pervasive, to attribute positive outcomes to internal causes.
I won because I'm brilliant and I trained so hard.
And negative outcomes to external, unstable causes.
I lost because the referee was biased or the weather was terrible. It's like psychological Teflon. Nothing negative sticks to you internally.
But if we're constantly telling ourselves we failed because the test was unfair, doesn't that become detrimental in the long run?
It has to.
I mean, doesn't the very mechanism designed to protect our ego actually keep us from learning from our mistakes?
That is the tragic irony of it. It protects us from short-term pain, but it absolutely hinders long-term growth and accountability.
And a related protective mechanism is unrealistic optimism, or optimistic bias.
This is the predisposition to just overlook obvious risks and expect things to turn out well.
It's why we don't buy travel insurance, or why college students believe they have a near zero chance of failing a class, even when the statistics say otherwise.
We just believe we're somehow immune to generalized negative outcomes.
So those biases are internal, but the external threats can be far more damaging. Let's talk about stereotype threat.
This occurs when people believe they might be judged or they fear conforming to a negative stereotype about their group.
And the anxiety caused by the stereotype threat itself, can impair performance.
It creates this devastating self-fulfilling prophecy, the cognitive load required to just suppress the anxiety and disprove the stereotype. It diverts resources away from the actual task at hand.
And the simple act of existing under that threat is a drain. It leads to concealing our identity.
Just hiding a part of who you are, a medical condition, your sexual orientation, your family background, to avoid prejudicial treatment.
And the sources are really clear that this act of hiding causes significant, measurable harm to your overall well-being. It's a massive, constant drain on that self-control reservoir we talked about.
All of these mechanisms define our self-esteem, our overall positive or negative attitude toward ourselves.
But we have to remember implicit self-esteem, too.
Right. Those unconscious gut-level feelings about the self that influence our automatic snap reactions.
Even if they contradict our conscious, stated self-view.
And to wrap up this section on the self, let's look at the self-verification perspective.
Okay, this one is fascinating. While most biases push us toward positivity, this motivation is different.
It's the drive to lead others to agree with our existing self-views, even if those self-views are negative.
It's a profound challenge to our idea of human nature. The insight is that we would rather be understood, even negatively, than risk the cognitive dissonance of a positive self-view that feels, inauthentic or unstable.
So that explains why some people stay in jobs or relationships that confirm their worst fears about themselves.
Predictability and verification trump short-term happiness.
That's a heavy note to end on. We've established that the self is complex, resource-limited, and often blinded by its own defense mechanisms.
But what happens when this carefully managed identity steps out into the noisy, demanding world of others? Let's move into social influence.
Let's do it.
So the moment the self engages with society, it's subject to social influence.
Right, the efforts by one or more people to change the behavior, attitudes, or feelings of others. This can be super subtle, like feeling awkward if you're standing alone.
Or as overt as a direct demand. And the primary way this pressure shows up is through conformity.
Which is the pressure to behave in ways that are consistent with social norms.
These norms are the unwritten rules, the expected behavioral patterns that structure every social situation, from a classroom to a line at the grocery store.
And we really have to distinguish between the two crucial types of norms, because only one carries explicit moral weight.
Okay, so first you have descriptive norms.
These just describe what most people do. Most people stop for coffee on Tuesday mornings. It's a statement of fact about frequency.
Versus injunctive norms.
Which specify how people ought to behave, what is approved or disapproved behavior.
You should recycle, or you ought to be respectful to your elders.
The injunctive norm carries the weight of social reward, like approval, or social punishment, like disapproval.
And this distinction is vital because of the normative focus theory.
The core idea here is that norms, whether they're descriptive or injunctive, only influence our behavior if they are salient or focal to the people involved.
Okay, so give me an example.
If I'm walking through a park where littering is really common, that's a descriptive norm, I might be tempted to litter too.
Right.
But if I see a giant sign that explicitly says, keep our park clean, making the injunctive norm focal,
You're far less likely to litter. The sign doesn't change the descriptive reality of the litter on the ground.
it just changes which norm is active in my mind, and that shifts my behavior.
So why do we obey these unwritten rules? Is it because we genuinely agree, or just because we want to avoid standing out?
And that's the difference between public conformity and private acceptance.
Public conformity is doing or saying what others do without any internal agreement. You just nod along in the group meeting because you don't want to cause trouble, but inside you completely disagree.
It's superficial behavior change.
Huh?
But private acceptance, on the other hand, is when you actually come to feel or think as others do.
That's a genuine, deeper shift in your attitude or your belief. If you privately accept the group's policy, you'll defend it even when the group isn't around.
And these two levels of conformity are driven by two distinct sources of influence. The first is normative social influence.
And that's based entirely on the desire to be liked, to be accepted, or to avoid being excluded. We conform to fulfill the social expectation,
And the second is informational social influence.
which is based on the desire to be correct or accurate.
Right. If you're in a strange or ambiguous situation and everyone else is behaving a certain way, you assume they have better information than you do.
So you follow them because you want to be right. This is often the engine of panic during an emergency.
And the intensity of this pressure is amplified by cohesiveness.
The extent to which we're attracted to a group and want to remain members, the tighter the bonds.
The more valuable group membership is, and therefore, the harder we work to meet its expectations and conform.
But despite all these powerful forces that are compelling us to follow the crowd, we have this persistent belief in our own independence.
Thanks to the introspection illusion, this is the deep-seated belief that social influence plays a smaller role in shaping our own actions than it does in other people's actions.
We think I chose this product because I like it. They chose it because the advertisement told them to.
It's the ultimate form of self-serving bias in the social realm, protecting our self-perception as these totally autonomous actors.
But if we are so easily influenced by invisible norms and distant authority figures, are we really free?
It's a great question. Even our most seemingly intentional actions are often rooted in these invisible influences. Now let's move from that unspoken pressure of conformity to explicit requests.
Okay, so compliance. This is the specific social influence that involves a direct request from one person to another.
And this is the domain of sales, politics, persuasion, and the sources basically give us the playbook.
And that playbook is built around the 6 basic principles of compliance. These are the levels that make us say yes, even when we probably prefer to say no.
So we have friendship liking,
We comply with people we like.
commitment consistency,
We comply if it aligns with something we've already done.
scarcity,
We comply if the opportunity is rare.
reciprocity,
We comply to return a favor.
social validation,
We comply if others are doing it.
and finally, authority.
We comply with people we perceive as experts.
So let's detail how these principles get weaponized into specific tactics. We can start with the foot in the door technique.
This one is a brilliant use of the consistency principle.
You start with a tiny request that's almost impossible to refuse, like signing a tiny petition.
Okay.
Once the person agrees to that small request, they start to view themselves as a helpful person or someone who supports that cause.
So later, when the larger, more substantial request is made,
They're much more likely to comply just to maintain that internal consistency with their new self-view. They feel psychologically compelled to follow through.
then you have the opposite, the door-in-the-face technique, which leverages reciprocity.
Here you start with an enormous, unreasonable request that you know is going to be rejected. That's the door in the face.
And then you immediately follow up with the much smaller desired request.
Because you made a massive concession, dropping your request so dramatically, the target feels obligated to reciprocate that concession by agreeing to your second smaller request.
They feel like they won the negotiation and should meet you halfway.
We also have the truly sneaky ones, like the lowball procedure.
This is when the core offer is changed to be less attractive after the person has already accepted it, like agreeing to buy a car at a great price.
Only to have the dealer come back and say, oops, we forgot to add the mandatory dealer fees.
And yet, because the person has already committed mentally to the purchase, they've already imagined owning it.
They often stick with the deal, even at the now higher price, rather than admitting they made a mistake. That initial commitment just locks them in.
That's not all technique builds on reciprocity and perceives value.
Right before the target can accept or reject, the influencer adds an incentive, making the whole offer seem suddenly much better.
This gym membership is $50 a month, but wait. If you sign up right now, we'll throw in 2 free personal training sessions.
Exactly. And finally, the deadline technique leverages scarcity.
Compliance is increased by stating the offer is only available for a strictly limited time.
It artificially induces that fear of missing out, short-circuiting rational thought and forcing an immediate decision.
So we've covered requests or compliance. But what happens when influence becomes a direct order?
That's obedience, where one person directly orders others to behave in specific ways. This usually relies on the principle of authority, often backed by some kind of institutional power or perceived expertise.
And that kind of control is often met with the strongest psychological defense we have, reactance.
This is a negative emotional and cognitive reaction to efforts by others to reduce our personal freedom. It's that deep, primal pushback against being controlled,
The don't tell me what to do impulse?
which often leads us to do the exact opposite of what was ordered, just to reassert our autonomy.
Not all influence is coercive or intentional. A massive part of our social lives involves unintentional social influence.
Where others change our behavior simply by existing or acting around us with no intention to persuade us at all.
The most immediate example is emotional contagion.
The spread of emotion or moods from one person to another. If you walk into a meeting where everyone is agitated, you start to feel keyed up, even if you don't know why they're stressed.
Our limbic systems just synchronize with the collective mood, whether it's anxiety or joy or frustration.
It shows how fragile and interconnected our emotional landscape really is. One negative person can genuinely contaminate the mood of an entire office.
Then there is symbolic social influence. This one's fascinating because the influencer isn't even physically there.
It's the influence resulting from the mental representation of others.
This happens when you're facing a moral or behavioral choice, maybe debating whether to cut corners on a project, and you think,
What would my mentor say? Or my dad wouldn't approve of this.
right, that internalized image of the person you admire, the one who embodies an injunctive norm, guides your behavior even if they're miles away.
We carry the expectations of important people with us. And tying back to the learning perspective, we have modeling or observational learning.
Which is the fundamental process of acquiring new behaviors, from complex skills to simple social etiquette, just by observing others.
We unconsciously mirror the actions and emotional responses of those around us, often without even realizing we're doing it.
Okay, so we've seen the self is fragile, and the social environment is relentless in trying to shape it. Now let's see what happens when these individuals come together into structured groups.
This is where things can get truly dysfunctional.
Right. Groups are the fundamental building blocks of society. We define a group as a collection of people perceived to be bonded together in a coherent unit.
A quality social psychologists call entitativity. That perception of coherence makes the group feel like it's more than the sum of its parts.
And we categorize these units based on how the members are linked. So, common bond groups.
Are defined by members being bonded to each other. A family, a close-knit study group, a long-standing jury. These usually require face-to-face interaction.
In contrast, common identity groups are where members are linked via the category as a whole.
A nation, a large corporation, or fans of a global sports team. You share an identity with people you've never met just because you belong to the same abstract category.
And regardless of the type, groups develop a structure. This includes defining status,
A member's rank or position.
roles, the expected behaviors for specific positions, like the taskmaster or the emotional supporter.
And of course, the ever-present norms, and the overall structural force is cohesiveness.
All the forces that cause members to want to stay in the group.
And high cohesiveness creates strong bonds, which, as we mentioned, significantly increases the pressure for normative conformity. If you love the group, you will fiercely protect its norms.
So how does the presence of that cohesive group affect individual performance? This is the study of social facilitation.
And it's surprisingly complex. It all boils down to the drive theory of social facilitation.
The central idea is that the mere presence of others, whether they're watching you or just co-acting, increases your arousal.
And this arousal then strengthens the dominant response.
Okay, let's unpack that. The dominant response is the reaction that's most likely to occur. So the task is simple or well-practiced or automatic.
Like a professional musician playing a well-known piece, the correct action is the dominant response.
So the arousal from the audience actually improves their performance.
Exactly. But if the task is new or complex or difficult, like an undergrad giving their first presentation on a complicated theory,
The dominant response might be hesitation, confusion, or making a mistake.
and the audience arousal intensifies that confusion, leading to poorer performance. The audience is an intensifier, not an inherent enhancer.
That distinction is crucial. The theory also mentions evaluation apprehension
Our concern over being judged by the audience.
and distraction conflict theory, which suggests that the conflict of dividing your attention between the task and the audience also contributes to that shift.
But group dynamics can also cause performance to drop just through a lack of accountability, and that leads to social loafing.
The measurable reduction in individual effort when people work collectively compared to when they work individually.
This happens most often on additive tasks, where individual contributions are just combined, and it's hard to identify exactly who did what.
If I'm pulling on a rope with 10 other people, I can put in 80% effort and no one can prove it.
The larger the group, the easier it is to hide your lack of effort, fueled by the diffusion of responsibility.
And finally, when the crowd gets too large, we can lose ourselves in de-individuation.
A psychological state of reduced self-awareness caused by being an anonymous member of a large crowd, our internal self-control mechanisms get weakened.
And we become highly responsive to the most immediate group norms, which can lead to reckless or even extreme behavior we would never attempt alone.
Anonymity plus social validation. It's a recipe for mob mentality.
So within groups and between groups, conflict is inevitable. Conflict is defined as the process where individuals or groups perceive that others will take actions that are incompatible with their own interests.
And we frequently face social dilemmas.
Situations where an individual's selfish action gives them an immediate personal benefit, but if too many people take that action, it harms the collective in the long run.
Like overfishing a shared resource or failing to pay taxes, the structure of these conflicts is often characterized by negative interdependence.
A win-lose situation. If one person gets a desired outcome, others cannot. It's a zero-sum game that pits people directly against each other.
And to manage these fraught dynamics, groups develop systems of justice. And the sources emphasize that justice isn't just about the outcome.
Right, it's about the process and the treatment people receive.
We can break justice down into three main types. Let's use a clear scenario. Two employees, Alice and Bob, are receiving bonuses.
Okay, so distributive justice is the judgment about whether Alice received a fair share of the reward proportional to her contributions.
If Alice worked 50% more hours than Bob, she should get a proportionately larger bonus. It's the fairness of the outcome.
Then there's procedural justice. That's the judgment about the fairness of the procedures used to distribute the rewards.
Was the system transparent? Was the algorithm used to calculate the bonus unbiased? Was the process the same for everyone? The fairness of the method.
And the most overlooked is transactional justice, the fairness of the communication.
Did the manager explain the decision clearly and honestly? Did they treat Alice and Bob with respect and courtesy, even if Alice thought her bonus was too small?
That human element often determines overall satisfaction, even when the outcome itself is unfavorable.
And even when groups try to be fair and rational, the group process itself can lead to massive failure. One common failure is group polarization.
This is the tendency for a group's deliberations to shift toward a more extreme position than its members initially held.
If the average opinion of the group leans slightly conservative on an issue, the group discussion will push the final consensus to an extremely conservative position.
The conversation acts as an echo chamber, validating and strengthening that initial tendency.
Even more notorious is groupthink. This is the dangerous tendency of highly cohesive groups, where cohesiveness becomes a liability, to assume their decisions are infallible.
And to actively reject any contrary information or dissenting opinions. They prioritize group harmony over realistic evaluation of alternatives, leading to catastrophic errors.
And finally, we can look at the role of leadership, the process of influencing others to set a direction for collective effort.
And the selection of leaders, particularly in times of crisis, can reveal deep social biases, like the glass cliff phenomenon.
The glass cliff occurs when women or minority candidates are disproportionately selected for leadership positions that are risky, precarious, or carry a high likelihood of failure.
Like taking over a company that is already losing money. They're set up to fail.
And they often succeed only to be blamed when the inevitable crisis happens. The theory suggests that during stable times, the default majority candidate is chosen.
But during precarious times, the organization is suddenly willing to take a risk on a non-traditional candidate, which is often a subtle way to place blame for the looming disaster.
That connects powerfully to our earlier discussion of social identity threat. Now, let's transition from group structure to individual action. Specifically, the moral extremes, helping and hurting.
Let's do it. Pro-social behavior. Actions that benefit others, often with no immediate, explicit benefit to the helper.
This brings us back to that fundamental moral question. Is genuine, pure altruism possible? Or are we always, at the end of the day, self-serving?
The sources offer the strongest argument for pure altruism. The empathy-altruism hypothesis.
This suggests that pro-social acts are sometimes motivated solely by the genuine desire to help someone in need, because the helper feels empathy for them.
And empathy is multifaceted. We talk about emotional empathy.
Sharing the feelings of others.
Empathic accuracy.
Perceiving their thoughts and feelings correctly.
And empathic concern.
Genuine feelings of compassion for the other's well-being. And the neurological foundation for this is the mirror neurons.
Right, which link our internal state to external actions and emotions. When we see someone hurt, the same neural pathways fire in our brain as if we were hurting, driving that empathetic response.
But social psychology is nothing if not skeptical of pure motivation. The first self-serving counter-theory is the negative state relief model.
This suggests we help not to relieve the victim's suffering, but to reduce our own uncomfortable negative emotions, like distress, sadness, or guilt, that we experience when we witness suffering.
I help you because your suffering makes me feel bad, and helping relieves my distress.
A slightly different self-serving motivation is the empathic joy hypothesis.
Here, the helper helps because they anticipate the positive emotional reward they'll get from seeing the recipient's gratitude or success. They're seeking the warm glow of having made a difference.
And then there's competitive altruism, which is entirely status-driven.
People behave prosocially. They donate, volunteer, or help, primarily to boost their own status and reputation within the group. Helping becomes a form of conspicuous signaling.
And we also have evolutionary explanations. Kin selection theory suggests we are biologically programmed to help those who share our genes.
Thereby increasing the likelihood of those genes being passed on. And reciprocal altruism theory explains our willingness to help unrelated people.
Because there's an unspoken expectation that the favor will be returned later, benefiting us in the long run.
And finally, the highly nuanced defensive helping. This involves helping outgroups, but the underlying motivation is to reduce the threat they pose to the in-group's distinctiveness and status.
So you help the competitor, but only to subtly ensure they remain dependent or beneath you in status.
As complex as the motivations are, the barriers to helping are even more tragic. The most famous is the bystander effect,
Where the presence of multiple witnesses inhibits helping behavior during an emergency.
This effect is created by two concurrent psychological processes. First, diffusion of responsibility.
The larger the number of witnesses, the less responsibility any one person feels to act. They think someone else will surely call 911.
And second, and often more dangerous, is pluralistic ignorance.
In an ambiguous emergency, bystanders look to others for cues, since everyone is looking around and acting calm to avoid embarrassment.
Everyone collectively misunderstands the situation, assuming, well, since no one else is panicking, it must not be a real emergency, even when danger is clear.
The sources also tragically note that social exclusion, being rejected or ignored by a social group, can massively reduce the tendency of the excluded person to help others.
Probably because they feel less connected to the communal contract that necessitates helping.
And bringing this into the 21st century, crowdfunding is a fascinating new form of pro-social behavior.
Where funds are contributed to individuals or entrepreneurs with no immediate financial benefit to the helper, often driven by a combination of genuine empathic concern and reciprocal altruism.
Okay, so if pro-social behavior is about giving, aggression is behavior directed toward the goal of harming another living being who is motivated to avoid such treatment.
It has to be intentional harm. Historically, aggression was often explained by drive theories,
Suggesting that external conditions like high temperature or crowding arouse the motive to harm others. The classic statement here is the frustration-aggression hypothesis.
which stated that frustration always leads to aggression, and aggression always stems from frustration. While it's now seen as too simplistic, it accurately highlights the link between blocked goals and hostile intent,
A much more compelling explanation is the social learning perspective.
which suggests aggressive responses are acquired through direct experience or modeling. We aren't born knowing how to fight. We learn by observing parents, peers, and media figures.
Aggression is a learned social tool.
And modern synthesis gives us the general aggression model, or GAM.
This model posits that aggression is triggered by a wide range of input variables, both situational, like pain or provocation, and personal, like personality traits.
Which influence the individual's current arousal effect and cognitive state. Aggression is the result of these interacting internal states.
Let's look closer at the specific triggers in that model. The most potent situational trigger is provocation.
Actions by others perceived as malicious or intended to cause harm. A verbal insult is far more aggression-inducing than an accidental bump.
Then there is the surprising role of prior arousal, explained by excitation transfer theory.
Arousal from one situation, say intense exercise or a stressful commute, can persist and intensify emotional reactions in a later unrelated situation.
So you're already keyed up, and the next minor annoyance, like a spilled drink, receives the full emotional intensity of the prior unresolved stressor.
Leading to disproportionate aggression. And the simple presence of objects can influence us through the weapons effect.
The mere presence of a weapon cues aggressive thoughts and can increase the likelihood of aggressive action, even if the weapon is unrelated to the conflict. It primes the mind for violence.
On the personal side, the hostile attributional bias is a massive precursor to aggression.
This is the tendency to attribute innocent or ambiguous actions by others to malicious, hostile intentions.
If someone cuts you off in traffic, you automatically assume they did it to spite you, not because they are distracted. This bias predisposes the individual to lash out aggressively.
And this connects back to our discussion of identity protection with narcissism.
An individual with an unjustified, overinflated self-esteem is intensely self-focused. And when that self-image is challenged or threatened,
It can trigger narcissistic rage, an intense, often overwhelming, aggressive response designed to obliterate the source of the threat to that fragile ego.
aggression takes many forms. Indirect aggression is harm without direct confrontation, spreading rumors or ostracizing someone socially.
We also deal with bullying, which is repeated aggression against someone perceived as less powerful, and cyberbullying.
Aggression via electronic communication, which leverages anonymity and distance.
Tying this all back to part one, the best way to reduce aggression is through internal control, self-regulation, or self-control.
It's the internal mechanism we use for restraining anger and aggressive behavior. The state of our ego depletion battery is directly related to our ability to choose a non-aggressive response when provoked.
We also use punishment, the delivery of aversive consequences, but the sources stress that punishment must be correctly applied to be effective, swiftly, consistently, and strongly.
And finally, the widespread but debatable belief, the catharsis hypothesis.
The idea that expressing aggressive impulses in safe ways, like punching a bag, reduces the overall tendency toward harmful aggression.
And we should caution that while this is a popular belief, psychological evidence often shows that expressing aggression, even safely, can sometimes increase arousal and subsequent aggression rather than draining it.
All right, we've seen how we navigate social pressure and conflict. Now let's look at the pursuit of well-being, which begins with managing adversity.
Starting with stress. Our response to events that disrupt or threaten to disrupt our functioning.
And stress isn't just the huge crises. The sources highlight hassles.
Minor daily annoyances, like a perpetually malfunctioning printer or forgetting your lunch, that pile up cumulatively to contribute massive amounts of overall stress.
It's the constant drip, 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 drip of small frustrations that wears us down.
And our primary external defense against stress is social support.
The emotional, tangible, and informational resources we draw from friends, family, and others. A robust support network acts as a buffer, making us far more resilient to life's inevitable stressors.
The inverse of social support is loneliness, the unpleasant emotional and cognitive state caused by desiring close relationships but being unable to attain them.
And it's crucial to note that loneliness isn't about being alone. It's about the deep, painful mismatch between the relationships you want and the relationships you have.
And of course, severe adversity can lead to post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, a severe psychological condition resulting from experiencing or witnessing an extremely frightening, life-threatening ordeal.
When we make those errors, whether minor or massive, we're often plagued by guilt, which is a significant resource drain. And this brings us back to that need for renewal through self-forgiveness.
Learning to forgive oneself for mistakes, errors, or regrettable actions.
Guilt is so powerful because it keeps us locked in the past, consuming emotional energy that could be used for proactive self-control.
And the psychological benefit of self-forgiveness is profound. It's the mechanism that enables the individual to break free from past errors, to transform paralyzing guilt into forward-looking responsibility, and to focus on future purpose and growth.
If we revisit the concept of ego depletion, this connection becomes crystal clear. Guilt is a form of massive internal cognitive load. You're constantly running a mental self-recrimination loop.
So forgiving oneself is essentially shutting down that background process, instantly freeing up those valuable cognitive and emotional resources.
It allows us to replenish the self-control capacity that was previously dedicated to self-punishment.
Therefore, self-forgiveness isn't just a moral virtue. It's a critical tool for psychological resilience and continuous moral action. You can't be good today if you're paralyzed by yesterday's failures.
Moving into motivation, the self-determination theory, or SDT, provides the framework we need for understanding the quality of our drive.
SDT distinguishes between intrinsic motivation
Pursuing activities purely for their own sake, enjoyment, or inherent interest.
and extrinsic motivation.
Seeking external rewards like money, grades, or status.
And intrinsic motivation is consistently linked to higher levels of well-being, persistence, and deeper learning. You read the textbook because you genuinely love the subject.
Extrinsic motivation, while effective for performance, often erodes the intrinsic enjoyment of the activity. If you only study for the grade, once the grade is gone, your motivation vanishes.
A critical factor driving successful motivation is self-efficacy.
Confidence in one's own ability to accomplish specific tasks. High self-efficacy is not general self-esteem. It is domain-specific confidence that pushes us past obstacles.
And that confidence, combined with intrinsic motivation, drives behaviors like entrepreneurship.
Initiating change, often by starting a new company or designing a new product or service, you need both the belief that you can succeed, efficacy, and a deep internal passion for the idea, intrinsic motivation, to take on that kind of systemic risk.
And we culminate our deep dive with the elusive goal of happiness or subjective well-being.
This is defined comprehensively as global life satisfaction, satisfaction with specific life domains, frequent positive feelings, and minimal negative feelings. It's flourishing in a holistic sense.
The sources mention the optimum level of well-being theory, which is an interesting finding. For any specific task, there's a sweet spot of happiness associated with maximum performance.
So being mildly cheerful is probably better for detailed work than being absolutely manic with joy. We need focus, not euphoria.
But the truly challenging concept for anyone pursuing goals is the hedonic treadmill.
This is the persistent, documented view that people ultimately adapt to and return to their basic personal happiness set points after experiencing emotion-generating events.
You buy the dream car, you're elated for a few months, and then you're back to your personal emotional baseline, already looking for the next external stimulus.
This raises a massive practical dilemma for any undergrad listener. If the treadmill just brings us back to zero, does pursuing external goals, like a perfect GPA, a high salary, or specific relationship status, actually make us happier in the long run?
The psychological answer is that sustained happiness doesn't come from achieving the external goal, but from how you pursue it.
So to genuinely increase that baseline happiness set point, you have to focus on activities that promote intrinsic motivation.
Finding deep meaning and enjoyment in the process itself, and continually investing in internal resources like social connections and self-forgiveness, which are portable and immune to the hedonic adjustment that happens with external rewards.
So the treadmill ensures that the goal itself won't sustain you, but the virtuous process required to reach it, the dedication, the growth, the meaningful relationships that can. That shift in focus is the key to psychological thriving.
We've covered a massive territory today. We started by mapping the inner life, the complicated demands of identity, the struggle for self-knowledge, and the finite resource of ego depletion.
We then explored the world outside, seeing how easily the self is pulled by social influence, compliance tactics, and the sometimes destructive pressure of group dynamics, leading us to examine the spectrum of human behavior from competitive altruism to narcissistic rage.
And the unifying theme across all these concepts is the constant, difficult tension within the human psyche. We have a powerful need for autonomy, exemplified by the defiant spirit of reactance, that pushback against being controlled.
But this is continually balanced against our even more powerful, often primal, drive towards social connection and alignment, driven by normative social influence and group cohesiveness. We are striving constantly to be both unique and perfectly integrated.
So we'll leave you with this final provocative thought to chew on. If the hedonic treadmill means external achievement is a temporary fix, and ego depletion guarantees that your self-control will eventually run out, how do you sustain the inner life required for genuine happiness and long-term virtue?
We suggest the answer is not in seeking more external success, but in mastering the internal psychological tools we discussed. Use self-forgiveness not as an excuse, but as a critical renewal mechanism to free up the energy drained by guilt and past mistakes.
And relentlessly pursue intrinsic motivation, find inherent joy in learning, growing, and serving others, because that is the only fuel source the hedonic treadmill cannot burn through.
Think about that internal tension. Apply that hard-won knowledge and keep diving deep into what it means to be human.
We'll catch you on the next deep dive.